Peace to the saints. Today's conversation is about one individual who calls himself Professor Jiang. He has a YouTube channel entitled Predictive History. He's become wildly popular in recent weeks. And I thought that it would be worth looking into some of what he says because of his popularity, but also the fact that the mainstream media, particularly those who are MAGA supporters, are now starting to put him in their crosshairs. And in fact, more broadly than MAGA supporters, we can say those who are, pro-West. And even some surprising characters, like recently we saw Mehdi, the fellow with the British accent, looks like he's from somewhere, some Muslim country, right? Very intelligent gentleman, but just trying to jog your memory, not to say anything negative. Very intelligent fellow, but I think a lot of people were surprised at the way he engaged Professor Jiang. And I'm going to call him just Jiang, in as much as, if you're not a professor, I don't think you should call yourself a professor. I think it's dishonest and misleading, but that does not mean that the gentleman is not intelligent or accurate. So what I want to do with you all is take a look at some of his perspectives on history and politics, and let's ask ourselves, what do we think? Are they dead on? Is he a Chinese propagandist? Is he leaving things out? Is he thorough? Is he accurate? So as we go through, and I have two videos queued up, which collectively would be 2 hours a pop. It should be 2 hours collectively. And of course, we're breaking it down. We're really going to dig in. So if you guys would like to go at length and really get into it, I'm happy to do so. Thank you to those who are watching on twitch.tv/Marquette Devon. I really do appreciate it. You are a part of the revolution in as much as you're doing that. And those who have questions, comments, there should be PayPal, Venmo, and Stripe information in the description so that you can share your questions, comments, tithes, tuition. Let's go ahead and get after this work. Here we go. I selected this one because it is his most recent video. And in addition to this, I'd like to look at a video he did, if you guys want, a year back. And this was the one that was supposed to be predictive. It was about Iran and the West. And I'd also like to look at another one he did on Iran and the West more recently, but it's all up to you guys. I operate at your pleasure.
About an hour ago, Donald Trump addressed the American people. This follows
he addressed the world, but yes.
An address from Prime Minister Albanese of Australia to his people, as well as Prime Minister Starmer to the British people. And in both speeches by Starmer and Albanese, they said to the people, we know that fuel prices, gas prices are going up, and we should expect more pain, but we will do as much as we can.
This really does underscore the sickness of the Westerner, which is to say that it does not matter that they are attacking another country, stealing their sovereignty, terrorizing the population, engaging in essentially what they call terrorism, and causing much bloodshed, interrupting a whole planet Earth of people. They're more so concerned about how much money they pay at the pump.
To ensure that your wallet is not too impacted. Donald Trump, in his address.
And you know what? For people who say Jiang is biased, certainly I think there's some points in which that'll come out, but I do want to state, I believe he rightly categorized Western democracies, their citizenry, as money focused and money hungry.
To the American people, basically said that this war will continue, and America may start to bomb energy and oil infrastructure of Iran. Okay, so let's listen to a few of his words.
Our economy is strong and improving by the day, and it will.
Donald Trump is the most extraordinary liar we've seen in political office, which is remarkable because all of the politicians lie, but he stated that our economy is strong. That's not true. And improving. That's also not true.
Soon be roaring back like never before.
And he's a constant contradiction. He said it's strong and improving. Then he states it'll be roaring back, which is a concession that it is in fact not in the state that he wants it to be.
It will top the levels that it was a month ago. I've made clear from the beginning of Operation Epic Fury that we will continue until our objectives are fully achieved. Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Age.
So he states that we, meaning the American government, which holds the American taxpayer hostage, they're going to bomb Iran into the Stone Age. This is the utter savagery of the Westerner. And when I say things like white people are evil or Westerners are evil, I say it to suggest that they are the majority in these Western democracies that go around the earth with imperialist postures and create death and destruction. And if you're a white person listening and saying, bro, that's not right, I agree, it's not quite right for me to say that. But it's also not quite right for so many of you to sit back while your family members, your friends condone this kind of violence and evil. It is in your silence that we see things like colonization, mass enslavement, genocide. And frankly, you need to do something because you are the majority in Western societies. So it is with your consent that this happens. And Osama bin Laden was interviewed by a Western journalist. And of course, you all don't get to hear what he actually said, because the key is to make him seem like the boogeyman, to make him seem evil and unreasonable. But he stated something that has always been with me, which is the idea that if you are in a democracy and you get to vote, anything that your government does, you've consented to at a level, at least the majority of people. And I, one, don't think we have a functioning democracy, but it's still true. And we are responsible for what our government does, whether it's us supporting through the tax dollar, us supporting through the voting booth, or us failing to rise up.
Ages where they belong.
Okay, so he's basically saying that we're winning this war and we will bomb them to the...
He didn't say in that remark that you played that he was winning the war, but he has said it previously, and there's no doubt that his entire administration is parroting that lie. One thing I want you guys to keep attuned to is, especially when you're involved in complex conversations and there's some level of sophistication, definition matters. And you'll often hear folks who are not very careful, they'll throw words out and they don't define the term. There's a level of assumption, and it is in these assumptions that we find misunderstanding. But just now, Jiang played a clip and then made a statement that was not justified by the clip, but I will concede that to him in as much as the Trump administration is constantly saying that they're winning at everything.
Stone Ages, which tells us he's actually not winning this war, okay?
Now listen to what Jiang just said. That didn't actually make sense. And one thing I try to train you guys to do is ask yourself, A, is that true? And then B, because someone wearing glasses or they fit into a demographic that we view as intelligent, or they're calling themselves a professor, or whatever the case is, to actually pay attention to what they're saying and put it through the test of logic. So let's re-listen to what Jiang says. And this is not to strike at him. This is just to take a critical lens to what he's saying.
Okay, so he's basically saying that we're winning this war and
He didn't say that, but keep going.
we will bomb them to the Stone Ages, which...
We will bomb them to the Stone Ages. Now listen to the interpretation of that.
Saying that we're winning this war and we will bomb them to the Stone Ages, which tells us he's actually not winning this war, okay?
He said that phrase means that America is not winning the war. Well, that didn't add up. Where was the logic? It was a leap. And from where he started to where he landed, there was no logic in between. So that's something that frankly didn't make sense from what Jiang said. And in fact, if I had to ask who's winning the war, Iran or the United States, there's no doubt that the United States is winning the war. Well, how might I measure that up? Because you should ask me, well, define victory as it currently stands. If we had to just stop the battle right now, who won? Well, if you look at casualties, Iran for sure has more casualties, both in terms of their soldiery and even their leadership, but also their civilian population. It's very disheartening. And also, if you look at damage to infrastructure, whether it's civilian infrastructure or the economic infrastructure that's used to move the country forward, Iran has extensive damage. So there's that. Then you might say, well, Marquette, Americans have lost lives too. Agree wholeheartedly. in addition, the United States has had several of their military bases destroyed, but clearly that damage has not affected the American nation state enough that it even bothers the populace. The United States government has hidden away the casualty figures, which are, of course, much lower than Iran. And we've not suffered any bombing to civilian infrastructure in America. And we can spare those military bases, obviously. Now, it's been at great expense, but we know that America's government has, all of this fraudulent financial dealings with debt and derivatives and bonds and all of this crap. So the United States is going to work some more wizardry, in line with Israel and the whole Western farce that they enforce on the world. So I think the United States will be all right. But as it currently stands, the United States of America is winning this war. That's just the facts. Now, if you look at the fact that it's America and Israel versus Iran, are America and Israel performing at a level that is impressive? Absolutely not. Which side would I be more impressed with? Iran, by far. Which side am I rooting for? Iran. Why? Because God is on their side. Goodness is on their side. But what I won't do is allow my distaste for American imperialism and the greed and dishonesty of the Trump Israel regimes to cause me to lie. And frankly, I think that he just lied. And the easy way to challenge that is to say, okay, well, define how Iran is winning right now.
Now, I also want to look at another person who is Peter Hegseth.
New strategic map.
So remember, this war in Iran, it's not ending. In fact, many people believe it's only starting to ramp up. So there are rumors that Donald Trump has already authorized the use of ground forces. And so we could see an invasion of Iran as early as this weekend, but certainly, definitely this month, okay? But while America is fighting this war
I think we can all agree on that. That's no particularly insightful prediction in as much as the month has just started. It's April 2nd. So to say it will occur this month, well, it's already been 1 month of fighting. Of course, it'll occur within this month because it's expensive just to have all of your forces gathered and just loitering in that area. It all costs money. So it would be economically intelligent and strategically wise to put them in play as opposed to having them as sitting ducks. So that's no particular insight there.
Iran, this is the Secretary of War, Peter Hegseth, and he's announced that America will control all North America.
From Greenland.
Now, I would really like to hear Jiang go into depth about that. And I think he missed an opportunity there. Even the language we find has a parallel to the Greater Israel Project. So Hegseth says the Greater North America. Israel says the Greater Israel Project. Israel's a little bit more out in the open, direct, and brazen about their imperialist goals, whereas the United States government still hasn't stepped into their full demon time modality. And so they're saying Greater North America, but what they really are thinking is white Christian dominance. And, Canada can get on board or they cannot. I surmise that the Trump administration views them as not the same kind of white Christians as themselves. And frankly, they don't really believe in Christianity. Christianity is really a code. It's a bit of wizardry that doubles for white supremacy. It's the same kind of level of Christian you see with the Ku Klux Klan, which is in fact a Christian organization. So the idea is not only that they want to exercise the Donroe doctrine, but in fact, they would like to actually take over in the old world sense, Cuba, potentially Mexico. And if it were me, I'd certainly take over Canada, no doubt. And Greenland, I don't know if I would make that move, but hey, while we're at it, throw them in the basket too. But this was a missed opportunity right there.
To the Gulf of America, to the Panama Canal and its surrounding countries. At the Department of War, we call this strategic map the Greater North America. Why? Because every sovereign nation and territory north of the equator, from Greenland to Ecuador and from Alaska to Guyana, is not part of the global south. It is a security perimeter in this great neighborhood that we all live in.
Okay? So basically, what he's saying is we will enforce the Monroe Doctrine in North America. So it sounds very strange to people in that Donald Trump is fighting this war in Iran that's not really winnable. At the same time, he is...
See, that's also not true. When he states that the war with Iran is not winnable, the victory is measured against your goals. The goal is for Israel to significantly weaken Iran and turn it into a proxy state, or to debilitate it at a level that it cannot stop the greater Israel project, and eventually to crush it so badly that it can be directly controlled by Israel, or they can directly control or indirectly control it through a puppet leader. That victory is being prepared for, and that victory has not, they didn't start pursuing that with the most recent bombing of Iran. That has been in the works when Israel started their decapitation strategy long ago, when they were bombing Iranian top-level military brass in Syria. So Jiang has discounted that, and also for some strange reason, and it appears that it was after he got flamed by Mehdi, that he now is kind of a little skittish about mentioning Israel. And the truth of the matter is, and one thing I just want to note for those within our culture, which is one of honesty and integrity, of course, we value our relationship. So, you know, if you have a real relationship with someone, protect them, protect their relationship or their reputation. But if you don't, be honest. And you have a lot of people who are lying on behalf of Jiang, and they're saying, oh, well, he calls himself professor, that's okay. You know, no, it's actually not okay. A professor is a formal title. Like if I came on here calling myself Lawyer Burton, or that would be a lie. Even if I every day give you lectures on law, if I'm not a lawyer, then I ought not call myself that. Similarly, he should not call himself Professor Jiang. Now, does that mean he's not intelligent? Does that mean he's not better than professors in political science? He could very well be better, but it's almost like a scam to call yourself that. And the fact that you'll see people in the comments defending that, it only represents the decline of Western civilization, and that we don't respect authority. We don't respect the legitimacy of institutions. We don't respect our own history. The United States has in fact, the best university system in the world still, even as we decline. And the university system does mean something. Yes, there are a lot of degrees that are valueless, but let us not become so low that because we like someone, we pretend as though it's okay for them to lie and to deceive. And that doesn't mean this guy's a bad guy. It's just saying that we can't condone that kind of thing. And absolutely, get those likes up. Let's work.
Is being aggressive in North America. He's seeking fights with Canada, with Denmark over Greenland, with Colombia, with Mexico, with Cuba. In fact, he's embargoing Cuba right now, and people expect possibly an invasion of Cuba very soon. So people just think that Donald Trump is all over the place and he's idiotic, okay? So this is Iran, and everyone says that a ground invasion of Iran would be stupid.
And I appreciate this image here. And I think this is one of the reasons that the gentleman is so popular. One, there's no doubt that he's been pushed in the algorithm. And he does give information that sounds very good. Some of the arguments are specious. Others are oversimplified. Game theory is often going to do that. And I think people like simplifications. And also, unfortunately, as human beings are emotional, they like to hear what they want to hear. And I think that he serves that up quite well. But more importantly, he has a great ability to teach, even if sometimes I don't agree with what he's teaching. And more importantly, the visuals are A1 excellent. And this one is very good. I think he moves through it a bit too fast. I think it's worth people being able to take a look at it. Some of you haven't seen a topographical map of Iran. Many of you do not know where Tehran is actually located within the territory. And I think that this gives you a sense of why Iran is a veritable fortress. So I think this is a great image to present.
As it is
In fact, let's see if there are any other things I want to point out on here before we move on. So as you guys can see here, we have Tehran. We have this body of water here, this body of water here. Those could, not both of them, but certainly this one here in the Persian Gulf could be used for an amphibious assault. The mountains are a natural bulwark against invasion. Yes. And I think those things are important, as well as it'd be nice if the neighboring countries were labeled, just so that you guys know where Iran has potential weaknesses and how the force would come in.
Much too large to invade. Right now, America has only about 50,000 troops in the Middle East, and the geography, the terrain, makes it very hard to control. Okay, so you have these mountains, the Zagros Mountains, which allows for the Iranians to hide and conduct guerrilla warfare and use drone strikes and artillery strikes. And then you have the desert.
You know, I think it would be nice. I don't know how he runs his show, but I don't think that added up, that last part. So he noted that guerrilla warfare could be utilized from the mountains, and I agree. In fact, the Cubans did the very same thing in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, and that's where Che Guevara and Fidel Castro waged guerrilla warfare. So there's definitely precedent for that. However, it seemed as though he suggested that drones would be launched from the mountains. Maybe he suggested that, he wasn't quite clear, and things like that I think are worth questioning.
Which makes it very hard to cross, okay? So even if the Americans were to attack from here, from Iraq, they would have to face the mountains. If they were from here, from Iraq.
And this is what I reference, which is that it'd be nice to label what those neighboring countries are, because, you know, very few people are very strong in geography, especially the geography of foreign nations. And one bit of context is that he knows that if the Americans were to strike from Iraq, and I haven't quite previewed this video, so he may elaborate on it, but we foolishly think, due to the American government's lies, that Iraq is a government that is completely in support of America, because we went in, the United States government went in, they murdered Saddam Hussein. Yes, that was murder. And they dominated that country and killed many people. And so I guess many people in America assume that they're under control, but in actual fact, there's a significant Shia population there. The Iraqis have fought since Saddam was deposed, and it's not quite that easy. The story is not that neat, or I should say the story is quite neat, but the reality is not that neat.
They would have to face the mountains. If they were attacked from Pakistan, from the east, they would have to face deserts, okay? And if they were to attack from the south, they would face all these mountains. And also, you're far away from Tehran, which is ultimately your objective, okay? So
one thing I'd like him to elaborate on is, why is Tehran the objective? Why? Is that where the uranium is? Is that where the government officials are? Is that where the population is, and you want to take out a high number of civilians? So those kind of assumptions really are important to clarify. And of course, that might not be chief among his aims in this talk, but things to ask as you go through. I do want to shout, Emmanuel came in via Venmo offline early this morning, came in at the baller alert level. He writes, appreciate the work, came in at $120 on Venmo, writes, peace of saints, I appreciate you. And I always appreciate people who come in offline just saying, hey man, I really, as a man, will say thank you for what you do, even when there's no acknowledgement. So I still want to acknowledge him. Shout out to Mr. Brown. Writes, peace to the saints, here to pay tuition. I just completed a full 5K. The run took longer than expected. I'm proud I made it to the end without stopping. That's the key, and you have to continue pushing yourself. And he came in long before this live session as well. I also acknowledge Jefferson, writes support via Venmo. I also acknowledge Caleb, writes tuition, peace to the saints, always consistently supporting. Shout out to Mr. Randall, came in via Venmo. He writes, always appreciate the work, Saint. What's your take on the possibility that the U.S. could be intentionally destabilizing the Strait of Hormuz to tighten control over global oil and benefit from other nations' dependence? It is possible, and this is the type of sinister strategy that you'd find from a Henry Kissinger. I don't know if they have anyone of that level of diabolical talent in the administration, but unfortunately, because Israel is running the show, I do not think that such calculations have been made. Unfortunately, this is a situation whereby Israel is operating in their own interests, and America may receive some ancillary benefits. But I do not believe that there is a rational strategy on part of the United States to take control of oil markets. And if that's the case, if the United States is going to be in control of oil markets, why don't they control them now? And if they are controlling them now, who's benefiting? Is it the American oil company or the American people? And also, I want you guys to mark my words, and this is why I have SAS in Africa. And mind you, in 2007, over 20 years ago, I wrote a paper explaining why Nigeria needs to take over probably 33% of Africa's land, and obviously the countries therein. And it should be the powerhouse. It has the population, it has the intelligence, it has the access to sea, the port, and of course, it has the core resource, the oil. And now we have Dangote's refinery, which will be supplying Europe and others who are going to seek oil. Not only do they have the oil, they're also refining the oil. That's unique in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. And you'll notice that consistently, a lot of commentators will overlook Nigeria factoring in. So that's something to think about. But the short answer is no. The Israelis are in control, and the United States government is not making plans that will benefit the American empire or the American people. However, the cadre or the small family and synagogue of Donald Trump is obviously being well taken care of. They're engaging in illegal insider trading. They're making trades on is it called Polymart or Poly something? They're doing all of these inside deals that benefit them, so that if America crashes, the Trump family will still be fine. So that is what it is. And I think we would hope that there were clever people looking out for our interests, but we can observe that American primary education is rubbish. American high school is a joke. So why all of a sudden would the United States government want to do a good job at this one thing when they can't even run a DMV? Thank you for that question.
There's lots of conversations about what the Americans are trying to do. Right now, the consensus seems to be the Americans first want to control the Strait of Hormuz in order to elevate the strain on the global economy, okay? But as you can see—
He said the consensus is that they want to control the Strait of Hormuz to elevate the strain on the global economy. I don't think there's a consensus on that. I think that there is agreement that the United States government may be organizing potentially to try to take some control over that area, but not to cause more strain on the global economy. I don't, in fact, think anyone has really said that. It's very Machiavellian, and that's not to suggest that the American government is beyond that, but no, that's not true. That's a lie. And I don't think that actually, let me not say, I don't know if he's willfully lying, but that's a blatant lie.
From this map, first of all, the strait, it's not very wide, and it's very close to the Iranian coastline in the mountains, so it's easy to attack from. And there are these, and then the Iranians can put mines all around the strait as well. So what everyone tells us is that an invasion of Iran would just be idiotic. At the same time,
so these are things that every single commentator has said. One thing I don't appreciate is the oversimplification. You often hear this where Trump is involved. You hear claims of him being idiotic. And we have to remember, when even though a president may be the ultimate leader, he has a cabinet, he has advisors. He's not making decisions by himself, however he may portray it. And to suggest that it's idiotic because you don't agree with it, this is silliness. Say Trump did decide to try to take over Karg Island or control the Strait of Hormuz. and it was at a great cost of American life. One might call it idiotic, but it's not idiotic if he rationally calculated, okay, this is going to cause for the deaths of 80,000 American seamen, and I'm comfortable with that. Carry on. It's a calculation I've made, and it's a cost I'm willing to pay. So that's not idiotic. That is a choice. And he's saying, hey, we have 360 million people, and I'm willing to put at risk 80,000 lives. That's not idiotic. That's a calculation. Now it may be a wicked calculation, but it's not idiotic. And that kind of oversimplification shows that Jiang is appealing to emotion, hatred, hatred of Donald Trump and Western imperialism, but it is not an analysis. Saying it's idiotic, that there's no analysis there.
Americans need to free up the Strait of Hormuz and allow for maritime navigation in order to stabilize the global economy. Okay. Already we're seeing.
Does the American government need to stabilize the global economy, or does the American government need to ensure that the petrodollar is still in effect? So again, these are things that he's saying that he's not justified. And again, I mentioned definition is very important. So to get a grip on nomenclature, we would have to ask ourselves, well, what do you mean by stabilize the global economy? What does that mean? Because when you take Russia off the SWIFT system, does that destabilize the global economy? When you make threats toward NATO, when you do when you create a bunch of tariffs, does that destabilize the global economy? Clearly, stabilizing the global economy is not a priority. He wouldn't have had all of those monstrous tariffs and then did a terrible job at managing it. So that assumption doesn't hold water. There's no evidence suggesting that Donald Trump wants to stabilize the global economy. Tariffs upset a system that had been quite old and theoretically worked all right. So Jiang is, I don't know if he's simplifying things or if he's just simple. But what is certain is that he provides good information, meaningful insight, excellent visuals. But among those who favor him, and it's probably because they share his politics, they overestimate the sophistication of his analyses by far. And he calls himself professor, and there's no doubt that he could be a professor somewhere. I learned under greats at the University of California, Berkeley. And the University of California, Berkeley is woefully liberal. Half of the professors are completely brainless Marxists. But there are some that were truly geniuses. I learned under a lot of folks who advised presidents. I learned under the foremost scholar of Southeast Asian politics, the foremost scholar on African politics, and the foremost scholar of fascism. And they were absolutely brilliant. And comparatively, the analyses that Jiang makes versus what they were providing, it doesn't compare at all. But remember, Berkeley has been ranked the #1 university in the world many years running. So, there's that. I imagine if you have something to say, you don't have to say it in the live chat. You can use the information in the description of the video, or the information that you now see at the bottom via Venmo or PayPal to share your comment if you're serious about it. Shout out to the ballers. Teddy comes in with a baller alert at the $100 level on Venmo. He writes, "Peace of the Saints. Salute to you, Saint." I appreciate you. Shout out to Teddy. Real baller. This man been balling for years. Shout out to Travis, came in supporting the work via Venmo. May I also acknowledge Michael writes tuition via Venmo. Shout out to Mr. Chambliss. He writes, "Here is the map of the greater North America. Trump is already running operations in Ecuador, even though it is not highlighted." No kidding. That sounds interesting. I did not know that. In Ecuador, that's an easy W. Just like Venezuela was an easy W, there's no doubt that Ecuador will be an extraordinarily easy W. Like low key, I feel like I could get the homies and take over Ecuador. Best case scenario, they have like a drug gang that can defend them. I don't think that their government has any significant, competent military. And part of it is not to say Ecuador or their government is no good. It's to say that Latin America has been largely peaceful. aside from some minor border disputes between Colombia and their neighbor, and maybe Guyana and their neighbor, and this often has to do with like things that are age old or newly discovered oil. Latin America is really peaceful. I mean, there was some minor tiff over the Falkland Islands, and the Brits came down and tried to flex their muscles, but Latin America, aside from the cartels going yay yay, very peaceful place. And when they're not being controlled or infiltrated by CIA, they seem to just be very chill people, which is to say, as Napoleon Bonaparte, or shall I say Napoleone Bonaparte, says that to have good soldiers, they must constantly be at war. And this has not been the case in Latin America. They're not very well practiced. And that's probably one of the reasons that Venezuela was such an easy lick. I mean, that was an easy one. But let's see what the gentleman sent over. Take a quick look. See, Hegseth says Trump has vision of greater North America. Critics alarmed by greater Israel parallel. Oh, that's literally what I just said. And I think that it makes perfect sense. And again, people will say, Marquette, well, why do you say that Jews are white? They are white because they come from Europe, which is what makes you white. But more importantly, their behavior is symptomatic of what we've observed from white societies. Steal land, steal resources, steal histories. So they're clearly for sure white. And it's quite unfortunate. This is not to suggest that Europeans or whites don't have a beautiful and impressive history. They do, but we have to acknowledge some of the consistent dangers of their mentality. Let's take a quick look at this. Right now, the U.S. and Israel are realizing, quote, greater Israel by attacking, invading Lebanon and Iran, said one professor. Hegseth is saying it's Greenland, Cuba, Canada, and Mexico next. I'd really love to see what they do with Canada, in as much as Canada is essentially a white country. Alarm mounted Monday over Trump administration's Greater North America plan, a geopolitical blueprint for U.S. imperial hegemony from Greenland to Guyana. That's drawing comparison. We'll see if they start with the black countries, start with the colored countries, and then move on to the white ones. I don't think they'll ever do anything to the white countries. And the reason that I say that is because, truth be told, the most offensive thing that has happened in recent time was Canada agreeing to accept Chinese vehicles into their market. There's no doubt that if Chinese cars go into the Canadian market, they will have immediately displaced American automobiles. And Chinese automobiles being just over that little border will start to entice Americans, and Americans who visit Canada will get a sense of the major gap in, dollar value, the value of what you're paying for and what you're getting, which frankly, you're paying a lot in America, not getting much. Whereas with the Chinese automakers, you're paying not that much and getting a lot. And that will in turn start to degrade the American auto market. So it is an extraordinary threat that Canada has posed. And upon that, if I were, say, a white Christian nationalist psychopath, at that point, I would have invaded Canada. And I do mean literally. I would have literally invaded Canada. I would have given them a heads up like, hey, don't fight back. If you do, we're going to devastate you. So you can choose to fight or not fight back, but we recommend don't fight back. And I would have probably given a preemptive strike just to let them know, like, this is not a game. This is the real deal. And I would have taken them over, made them a colony, gave them no voting rights, because the Canadians are much more liberal than Americans. And so if you give them voting rights, you'd basically be ensuring your own doom. So that would have been the wisest thing to do. And because he didn't make any meaningful move when Canada invited the devil in, and I'm not saying that the Chinese are the devil, they're absolutely not, but in terms of their ability to destroy America's false image of technological innovation, certainly I would have had to do them in. And Trump failed at that. And I think a lot of that is because, since World War II, there's been an order that, white countries don't attack white countries. It's kind of like, if you do that, you're a real bad guy. You're a real bad guy. They tend to like to attack Muslim countries or countries where there are people with melanin. So there you go. And you can question it if you want. And somehow, I'm not going to get into it. But anyways, carrying on. Let's see. A geopolitical blueprint for U.S. imperial hegemony from Greenland to Guyana. Mind you, I do believe Guyana just recently discovered significant oil. That's drawing comparisons with a messianic project being pushed by President Donald Trump's far-right allies and war partners in Israel. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth first unveiled the plan earlier this month, telling reporters Trump has drawn a new strategic map from Greenland to the Gulf of America to the Panama Canal and its surrounding countries. At the Department of War, we call this strategic map the Greater North America. Why? Because every sovereign nation and territory. Now, it's ironic that he calls them sovereign nations when, if you're planning to take them over, then in fact they are not sovereign nations. Why? Because every sovereign nation and territory north of the equator, from Greenland to Ecuador and from Alaska to Guyana — I don't even know why he's listing Alaska, it's not a country — is not part of the global south, Hegseth added. It's our immediate security perimeter in this great neighborhood that we all live in. Mr. Gerard, a Canadian professor at Cardiff University in Wales, said Monday on social media in response to Hegseth's comments, by Greater North America, he means Greater United States. And I actually stated that earlier in this video. I agree 100%. The U.S. is now and has long been a menace and threat to sovereignty and independence of its hemispheric neighbors. Well, I would even reformulate that and say white people have been a menace and threat to the whole planet Earth. They are the only group of people who have gone incessantly to take, steal that which is not theirs. Numerous observers have compared Trump's Greater America with the Greater Israel. Most zealous proponents want to conquer everything between the Nile and Euphrates rivers. Yeah. Anyways, I appreciate you sending that over. That was really a great read. And if possible, if some of you guys could reach out to this fellow right here — I think this is the professor. In fact, I'm going to reach out to him now because I'd like to interview him. I'm going to send him a DM. Okay, it looks like it's not letting me send him a DM. I might have to tweet at him, which is fine. Let's see, send this fellow a tweet. Great. Okay, fantastic. Now let's get back to good old Jiang.
Seeing lots of signs that America is preparing for a long, long war. So there are already 50,000 troops in the Middle East, and a lot of them will be deployed against Iran. But also, there's a letter from Leonard Anderson to reserves, telling them we must get ready to deploy, fight, and win. Okay?
I agree that the United States government is not being honest with the public. And I've said many times that they're going to send some lambs to slaughter to basically drive fervor within the American population so that they can get access to more capital and more lambs for sacrifice, and then they can put in a greater effort. Also, I think it was quite pathetic and embarrassing that they raised the age of enrollment for the military. I want to say it was from 35 to maybe 42. So I trust one of you geniuses in the chat can correct that. But the idea, I mean, if you look at the average American at 35, they're pretty washed. They're washed. Even the youngsters are washed. So the idea that you're sending in essentially older guys who are washed into your military, it shows that you are in great need of soldiers. And that's not a good sign.
So not only have they sent 50,000 troops to the Middle East, but they're preparing to call up the reserves as well. Okay, so this seems as though America is preparing for total war. Polymarket is a very interesting place to understand how global events will turn out, okay? And so there are three indicators that, in fact, a war is coming.
Now, this is wild disrespectful. And I'm going to go into this shortly, but I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to hit the like button. Like, we are way down on the likes. So yeah, let's go ahead and hit the like button. It's just a matter of respect. Give you guys a little bit of time to do that, and then we'll get back after it. And if you're asking, so, well, Marquette, why should I hit the like button? We're nearly an hour in. If you're still watching, then you like what you're seeing. You've paid $0 to watch this. It does take time, energy, and effort, and knowledge, a unique perspective that most people don't have. And if you're like, Marquette, I refuse to hit the like button, that's fine. Just block the channel and go watch somebody else. But if you are here, hit the like button. Costs you nothing, and I thank you. Okay, let me know where we are at with the likes. Go ahead, post that in the live chat. Let me know. And while you guys are posting that in the live chat, let me acknowledge some of the folks supporting the work. May I acknowledge Melanin. Writes, greetings, Mr. Bird from Mauritania, perhaps the last country on your list. Respect. Oh, no, actually, I've been very fascinated to stop in Mauritania. Is the capital there Nouakchott? I forget. I think it's Nouakchott. But yeah, I've been very curious. I just know that, unfortunately, the safety situation there has been questionable. I hadn't had any particular business. I've had interest, but no business. And so I haven't moved through, but yes, no, at some point you'll see me in Mauritania. And I appreciate you supporting the work. That's what I acknowledge. SK Simmons, he writes, I appreciate you covering geopolitical topics. Don't see a lot of Black content creators covering the war at all. I think it's for, I think the number one reason is they're just staying within their lane and their knowledge base, which I can respect. Shout out to the ballers. We woke now, writes, peace and blessings. Peace and blessings. This is a simple token of appreciation. I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Also acknowledge Israel, writes, do you think other European countries will join once they see American soldiers? No, I don't. And if a European nation joins, I think it would first be the United Kingdom. Then secondly, it would be Germany, and then thirdly, it would be France, and then fourthly, one of the Scandinavian countries. I think they'd end up joining in that order if they were to join, but I don't think that they will. I think that they will help in support roles. They will help financially, but I don't think that they will engage their militaries. Shout out to Life, writes, fruition. Okay. I don't know if he meant tuition. Beast writes, support for this high-level analysis, as usual, off topic. When is Abu going to stop stealing your ideas and talking points? I saw a clip of bro yesterday calling himself a revolutionist. Isn't it something? Starting to get annoying now. Yes, it really is. It really is. All of my children out there, right? Let me also acknowledge, shout out to Mr. Chambliss, came back. He writes, Tucker Carlson uploaded a talking session where he talked about Canada being overrun with immigrants and that maybe it's a good idea to take it and everything else in North America. Quote, power is not the ability to create destruction, but to restore order. Well, I don't think it's upon us to restore order in Canada, but there's no doubt that that's really the idea that you want Canada to be a white country defined by what you understand whiteness to be. And, I would just like to see the world civilized where, people can enjoy themselves and live in healthy ways. And unfortunately, what I understand white culture to be in the modern era does not facilitate that. In the old world, there's no doubt that white, or shall we say European culture, had its excesses, but there were in fact great Europeans and there were great Americans in times of old. But today you just see these new guys, they call themselves conservatives, but you got Scott Bessent is a Skittle guzzler. There's just recently another person related to the Conservative Party. Her husband came out as a cross-dresser. And you got Pete Hegseth is a Christian, but he is also an alcoholic and he's covered in tattoos. It's like, what does conservatism mean to these people? These are not the Benjamin Franklins. These are not the Thomas Paines. These are not the Edmund Burkes. These are the hillbillies. These are bogans, if you like. These are not the great white men who established Western civilization. These are their degenerate stepsons who are getting by on the reputation of white men from centuries past. And it's rather pathetic, to be honest with you. And they're essentially sinking the global ship, the ship that we're all on, as they try to swing haymakers in maintaining power. Shout out to Jim, came in a strong way on Venmo. He writes, tuition for the big homie. Peace of the Saints. Appreciate you. Peace of the Saints indeed. I also acknowledge Carter writes, peace of the Saints, came in by Venmo. came right back. He writes, Tesla, Polestar, and Lucid would become completely obsolete if the Chinese EVs hit the market. Night and day difference. Indeed. And I will say that Lucid is a really slick looking car from a body perspective. One thing that the Chinese lack, this is not new, is aesthetic and design, like beauty. Function, utility, they excel in. Technology and innovation, they do very well with. But the aesthetic and the beauty of the automobile, that's just not their thing. Not their thing at all. I saw a gorgeous Lucid today that made me think, oh man, I wish I didn't sell my stock. I sold my stock at a profit. Shout out to Brad, supporting the work via Venmo. May I also acknowledge Constantine writes tuition. Appreciate you. And may I also acknowledge Michael came in via PayPal supporting the work. Shout out to Clay. He writes, oh, hey, Clay, if you did not get my email, I got you set up on school with Book of Dark Truths and Boston University. And for those of you who need those pieces of education, which is probably most of you, you can go to school.com, SKOOL.com/Marquette, MARQUETT, click classrooms, get your education, and education will carry you forward. I just saw, I think, was it Oracle that laid off 20,000 folks globally? The times are changing. Shout out to the folks in my AI course because you are going to need those skills. Zachary writes, would it be helpful for you if we developed a list of timestamps for you regarding these videos? I wanted to suggest this video to you, but didn't know if it would be well supported. Would you find timestamps prepared for you in advance to be useful with respect to your time? No, I'm down to use the timestamps. It's really up to you. I mostly will go through, and I'm down to spend as much time as it takes to really understand. That's the neat thing about, essentially running my own program, is that I don't have to rush. If you guys are interested, there have been live sessions where I've spent 5 hours straight. I've spent 6 hours straight. And it's all just dependent on you folks. But, people who have a specific interest in what they'd like to look at, they can send it in via Venmo or PayPal, the timestamp, and I'll always take a look at it. Thank you for that query. Shout out to Clay. He writes, thank you for granting me access on school. My pleasure. Seven writes, I know you've criticized Putin in the past due to his lack of aggression. Absolutely. However, is it possible that he's playing a different game altogether? I don't think so. One of economics and subterfuge? No, I don't think so. Shout out to Wayne, writes, peace to the saints, tuition. I also acknowledge Melvin writes, tuition, peace to the saints, standing up and supporting. Shout out to Alejandro, writes, peace to the saints for the consistent game in all aspects of life. Shout out to Andrew. He writes, peace to the saints. I've been curious to hear your perspective on him since the drip trip. I'll catch the replay for sure. And he came in a strong way. Shout out to Andrew. And I think this is Andrew with those good hands. Shout out to Andrew. Brother's in great shape, excellent education, good hands, very developed gentleman. Love to see it. And shout out to all the folks who are on the drip trip. And I think we got a few folks on Super Chat I didn't see. Shout out to Anthony. And I also acknowledge CMD, writes, a win and achievement of objectives. U.S. will not win unless they pull in Iraq and Iran. Millions have to perish. Trump won't go there. So that's a loss. I don't agree with that, but I appreciate that. And that was a reasonable suggestion.
A ground invasion is coming. First of all, the pizza index is exploding. What does this mean? It means that in the Pentagon, when they're preparing to launch a ground invasion, they need to work overtime. And so they call for pizza, okay? And so pizza deliveries are going up. Gay bars are empty, okay? So when people...
This is so wild, disrespectful. And apparently maybe there's some legitimacy here because he doesn't seem to be a jokester. He's suggesting that when there's more pizza ordered, there's more overtime work going on at the Pentagon. That makes sense. And he's also suggesting that these conservatives are actually closeted homosexuals and the gay bars are empty because these balls are at work instead of having fun blowing each other's back out. And, that's really a sad thing. And I'm not surprised at all. I find it really disgusting that whites call themselves Christians while having a leader who is divorced several times and it has hired someone who is openly practicing sin. Very vile thing. Carrying on.
Or, don't have much to do, they go and, go on dates. The last is that people are making bets, large bets, that a ground invasion will happen, okay? So these are people who have inside information, And so they go on public market and make a bet that this will happen, knowing it will happen. So this guy bet $200,000 that a ground invasion will happen. And if it turns out a ground invasion does happen, he will win over $1 million. Okay, so these are three very good indicators that a ground invasion has been approved and it will happen very, very soon.
I agree with Jiang there.
Okay. Donald Trump himself has said many, many things, okay? So he said that, you know what? If we leave the Middle East, it's not our problem. We don't really care, okay? And he also says that, hey, NATO, it's your responsibility.
So the thing with Trump is that when he's talking, he's not being honest. He's leveraging, he's negotiating, he's persuading, he's threatening, he's bullying, he's testing the waters. And so we can only really take a small portion of what he says with any level of seriousness.
To open the Strait of Hormuz because we told you so and because you need the oil. And of course, NATO is angry at Donald Trump because previously Donald Trump threatened to take over Greenland. Okay, so everyone thinks Donald Trump is just a moron. He doesn't plan ahead because before this war in Iran,
again, this moron talk, and frankly, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's at any level, but when he's calling him a moron, he's saying based on the actions that are being taken. And there's no doubt that there's a number of folks that are involved in deciding on what's going to be done. And the idea that Donald Trump publicly asked the Europeans or the Western countries or NATO for help, that doesn't actually mean that he wants help. It could mean that he's asking for help, knowing that they're not going to give it, so that he can make them feel as though they weren't there for him, and he could leverage that debt, the psychological baggage, to make a different act, or to just test out what they're willing to do and which of the allies are really going to ride with him. There's so many different reasons he can be doing that. Donald Trump does not need them in this conflict, frankly. So I don't quite agree with the name calling here.
Where he needs the help of NATO, he was pissing off NATO by trying to take over Greenland. So Donald Trump is over the place. He's just a moron, right? But let's just assume, okay, that the ground invasion goes ahead.
So I think that analysis was extraordinarily weak to suggest that Donald Trump is a moron for threatening to take over Greenland if Greenland is strategically important. And obviously it has some value, because if it had no value, then Denmark would have said, hey, you can have it. If it had no value whatsoever, Denmark wouldn't be retaining it over this amount of time. And there's no reason that the Europeans would have positioned any number of troops there. So clearly it has some value. Furthermore, if you make a threat, sometimes it just lets you know who your enemies are, and it gives you a sense of if they'll fight and how much they'll fight. Maybe the idea on Trump's part was like, hey, if they don't seem like they're going to fight, we'll just take it. If they are going to fight, we won't take it now, we'll take it later. There are all kinds of reasons that certain moves are attempted or certain pump fakes are made. And frankly, I don't think that Jiang is honoring the fact that this could all be strategy. But there's no doubt that calling it moronic, I don't think has any merit, in as much as what did Trump lose? He didn't lose anything in threatening to take over Greenland. He didn't lose any material support from NATO that he actually needed.
What will happen? Well, as I predicted before, if a ground invasion were to go ahead, first of all, America would lose this war, because a ground invasion would fail, and the Iranians are fully prepared for a ground invasion. Second of all, if America loses war, the American empire would die because we'd be forced out of the Middle East. They would lose the petrodollar and the US dollar as a global reserve currency. And the third thing is...
So those are really monumental statements, but he's not substantiating any of them. He's not substantiating why and how the United States would lose the petrodollar. Like you have to explain that. You can't just say that. You got to explain that.
Global economy would collapse. So
and here's another really important thing. If you said the global economy would collapse, like what does that mean? And we should always ask, what does that mean? Is that true? I think, is that true? I think, yeah, it could be true, but what does it mean? And the reason that I say that is because, for example, you hear about the Great Depression and you think it's just a terrible thing all around. Well, was it? Say before the Great Depression happened, you were a 100 millionaire or you were a multimillionaire, tens of millions or $1 million. And then it crashed. And then you went in and bought assets extremely cheaply. And your family was largely unaffected. You were still kind of Gilded Age living. And then when the stock market recovered, you were like 10 times richer than you were before. So perspective is a critical thing to consider. And even as I think about a Great Depression now, I ask myself, if a Great Depression happened, how much would that affect me? Like, for example, the tariffs, I think, are a terrible thing. I've had to shut down 2 businesses. Just today, I got a tariff bill. Most of you haven't had to shut down any businesses, nor have you gotten any tariff bills. So perspective and positioning is absolutely critical when we look at any phenomena. If you ask me about tariffs, I think it was the most insane idea. I'm completely against it. I've lost businesses, I've lost money, but other people have gained money and grown their business. I got a guy, who was that? Oh yes, I had a handyman come in. He does remodeling. I had a handyman come in to do some work for me, and I'd asked him how business was. And he says, oh man, business has been great because Trump sent out all the illegals. So whether you are an illegal who's been deported or you have fear of being deported, they're not showing up to work. So I'm getting all the jobs, and I can charge whatever I want because there's no competition and there's high need. So construction, renovation, plumbing, oh man, I'm making a killing right now. Donald Trump has been great for business. Now, here's the thing. If you're on the consumer side, if you need a plumber, if you need construction, you're paying more and you're getting less, and you have to wait because people are they're booked up, they're backlogged. So your positioning matters an awful lot when making these kind of analyses. And I don't see any three-dimensionality in when he's explaining these things. A Great Depression is terrible if you're illiquid. A Great Depression is fantastic if you're out of the market and liquid. Or if you're in the market and you're going to hold on and acquire assets cheaply. It's never all bad. You know, there's some games where it's all bad. If you're playing blackjack and the dealer gets a blackjack, it's all bad for the whole table. If you're playing craps and someone throws a 7, some people on the table win, some people on the table lose. It depends on what you were betting on. This is not a blackjack situation where everyone loses together. It's a craps situation where some people win, some people lose, depending on what you were betting. Come on now. Come on now.
Clearly, Donald Trump is the worst president in human history.
I'm not going to object to that. I'm not going to object to that. Now, the reason he doesn't have to elaborate is because I agree. He doesn't have to elaborate for me. And this is kind of an irrelevant opinion, but carry on.
And he's a complete buffoon, right? Okay, but let's put our thinking caps on. Okay, let's use game theory and say, but what if, for some strange reason, Donald Trump wants to lose this war in Iran? What if he wants the American empire to collapse? What if Donald Trump wants to destroy the global economy? And then he'd be a genius, right? Right? He's a moron because he's going to destroy the American empire. But if he actually wants to destroy the American empire, then the man is the greatest American president ever, okay? Okay, so we're gonna have a fun class today, and we're gonna make the argument that in fact, Donald Trump is a genius. That in fact, all this chaos is purposeful. That there's actually a plan behind all this, okay?
So I do actually appreciate this, and this is a mark of someone who's actually thinking, which is that you're trying to look at the full picture. And as I mentioned previously, you're trying to give it dimension. and consider different perspectives. Now, this perhaps is in jest and it's an intellectual exercise, but it's a worthwhile consideration. I think the only problem is that he's focusing too much on Donald Trump as a rational actor, when really you should be looking at Bibi Netanyahu as a rational actor and America and Donald Trump as a proxy or tool. And I think that's his fundamental flaw and issue here. But my perspective is that he's clearly trying to avoid the accusations of being an anti-Semite. So that's where it lands us today. May I also acknowledge Melanin writes, Mr. Burton, I sincerely appreciate your interest in Mauritania. It's more welcoming and secure than often assumed. Oh, I bet that's the case. You know, so often Western propaganda, they lie, they try to destroy the tourist industries of other countries. He writes, and it would be an honor to receive you. Thank you for your insights. Oh, definitely. And I hope that you join peaceofthesaints.com, because we definitely want to have some sense of where our folks are throughout the continent. As you know, we're building SaaS in Africa, and we're making major investments in that. Shout out to James. He writes, would the EU and US stop it if Nigeria conquered? Well, perhaps, but it depends on the methodology and who's backing Nigeria. You see, there's a number of ways to conquer. You don't always have to go in with your army. Sometimes you infiltrate first using religion. You infiltrate first using a particular philosophy or ism. And if they go in with the backing of the Chinese, if they go in with the consent and cooperation of the Chinese, it's a different thing. Or maybe the consent and cooperation of the Russians is a different thing. So I think those are deals that are going to have to be worked out in advance. But the best thing that Africa can have, especially that region of Africa, West and Central Africa, is to have Nigeria gobble up those small, irrelevant, weak nation states. And it is for the protection of Black people. Because if you don't, you have a situation like you have in Kenya, where I think the Kenyans allowed 500 acres to be, 200 to 500 acres to be controlled by Israel. And the Israelis are going to have some settlements there. Well, we know what happens when they show up. We know what happens. So this is for the future and protection of the Black peoples of the earth. And it is a necessity. It is as necessary as it was when Putin invaded Ukraine. Shout out to Melanin writes, Mr. Burton, for a young person seeking to truly understand politics, where should they begin? What should they read to build a strong foundation? I believe I have some good political works, books on the list that I have, a book list. If you go to amazon.com/shop/the Saint and the Sinner, there's a book list there. If you take a look at those and none of those tickle your fancy, let me know. But I think those are great works to get started with. And truth be told, I really don't think that one can understand politics until you've done international business. That's why I tell you guys about tariffs. Most of you are not going to experience tariffs because you're consumers. But the moment you become a business owner, you start to experience tariffs, and then you understand the downstream effect of the business owner experiencing tariffs, where you have to improve profit margins, you have to replace people with software and technology, you have to close the business, which means take away people's jobs. So Trump's idea was that people would start manufacturing in the United States, when in actual fact, I never thought to myself, oh, I can bring my cosmetics business and produce in the US. No, I just shut it down because there's so much more red tape. There's so many more requirements in terms of health insurance and full-time employees and protections and wages and got to have HR and all this other nonsense. So it was just like, okay, I'll just shut down the business. And I think a lot of people who were small to medium-sized enterprises probably did the same thing. Carrying on.
Okay, that's the argument I want to make to you today. Okay, so what is the plan? What is going on here? All right, so first thing to notice is that the world gets 20%, okay? 20% of its oil from the Middle East, okay? Primarily going to East Asia. So India gets about 6% of its oil from the Middle East. Japan gets 75% of its oil from the Middle East. So East Asia is heavily dependent on Middle East oil, okay? But as you can see.
So I think I'm happy that he's going through this. I think this is important. When he says that the East Asia is heavily dependent on the Middle East, he said the world gets 20% of its oil. Well, what percentage does East Asia get? I think those are necessary breakdowns. So let's hear him out. But I think that's kind of one thing that I instantly thought, okay, well, that number is missing.
It also goes to Europe as well, and then also to the United States. All right, so the world is dependent on the GCC oil. If this war continues, if ground forces are used, then all the oil from the Middle East collapses. And JP Morgan has come.
You notice that he often uses this term collapse, and every single time he uses it, he never defines what he means. Does that mean that like zero, like the productive capacity of the Middle East becomes zero? Is that what that means? Those things really need to be elaborated on.
Out and said that by mid-April, the world will run out of oil. Okay? So this is.
Now, what does that mean by mid-April, the world will run out of oil? That doesn't even sound reasonable. Marquette, what do you mean? If the Middle East only produces 20% of oil, how can the world run out of oil? It's only 20%. So what the heck does that mean? That cannot be true. You don't need to be intelligent to know that it is impossible for that statement to be true. And these are the kind of things that it makes you say, like, what are you talking about? Like, who is believing this statement? It doesn't make any sense. He himself has contradicted this statement just 30 seconds ago.
Disaster for the world. But it's just much more than energy needs, okay? So because Iran is constraining movement in the Strait of Hormuz, we're seeing 7 major shortages. Okay.
Now, this is really important. And for those who are not, maybe they're not big into research, maybe he's not a professor, maybe Mr. Jiang is the only person that they watch. Sometimes they'll hear him say things and they don't realize he's just repeating what other people said or repeating what a scholar has said or something he heard on the news. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. None of us are knowers of all things. But what he's about to articulate right now, in terms of the other critical resources and commodities that are being squeezed as a result of Trump's blunder or him just being the lapdog of Israel, these are also very important things. And so I really want you to pay attention here. But again, I don't want you to be fooled into the idea of thinking like Jiang is the first to mention this. Absolutely not. This has been a long time discussion. And so we have crude oil, we have LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, we have phosphate, helium, ammonia. Okay, I'll let him get into it. I trust he'll do so.
So yes, we know oil and LNG are being stopped, okay? But actually the problem is much worse because look at phosphate, ammonium, sulfur, urea. This is food production, okay? Primarily used for fertilizers. In other words, if this war persists, not only will countries run out of energy, they'll also run out of food, okay? Also, look at this. Helium and sulfur are used for what? They're used for semiconductors, the production of semiconductors. You use helium and sulfuric acid in the production of semiconductors, which leads to AI, okay? So, in other words, this war in the Middle East, it's impacting everything in the modern economy, okay? If this war continues, the global economy could collapse.
And again, with the collapse bit, what does collapse mean? Does collapse mean 20% of the global population starves to death? Does collapse mean that there will be global social unrest and civil war and strife? Does collapse mean that world hunger will increase? Does collapse mean that 40% of the human population will fall into poverty as measured by the World Bank or the IMF? What is the definition of collapse? And it's because he does this that his explanations feel so simple and neat because he's making it too ABC 1, 2, 3. when in actual fact, the pattern is not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The pattern is more so like 2, 4, 6, 8. And in his failure to convey the actual sophistication, he ends up being inaccurate and dishonest, but he maintains audience. When you make things very, very simple, then people are like, yeah, I get it. Well, yeah, they do get it. They get his story, but they don't get the reality. And frankly, there's not very much value in what he's saying because it's not clear. And it's not clear because he's not going to any meaningful level of depth.
But again, we're making the assumption that Donald Trump is a genius, and this is all part of his big plan, okay? So what is his plan? All right. So, okay, we know that there's a lot of oil in the Middle East, okay? But, you know, oil is not as rare as people think it is. There's also a lot of oil in Canada. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves, okay? Russia also has a lot of oil. So in other words, if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, if this war in the GCC continues, it doesn't mean the world no longer has oil. All it means is the world is now much more dependent on North America.
So for people of average IQ, they can listen to him and feel fine. But for someone with IQ and a decent short-term memory, you're like, hold on, buddy. You just stated, like just now, that the Strait of Hormuz deals with about 20% of the world's oil supply. But earlier, you just stated that the world would run out of oil. You just said the world would run out of oil. Now you're reminding us for the third time that only 20% of the world's oil supply goes through the Strait of Hormuz, but you said the world would run out of oil. So how's that add up? Those are directly contradictory. And then it'll bother you because he's not making sense. It's annoying.
America and Russia for oil. And so the global economy now shifts over to North America and to Russia.
Now, this is a bit too neat. It's a bit too neat because this presupposes a couple of things. And maybe he's dealing with volume, current or projected volume. I don't know. But it's a bit too neat. And this is one of my criticisms, because in attempting to make the story very simple and very neat and bipolar, which is to say, saying that there's Russia and America as the big players, it's like, okay, well, does Guyana have any oil? Does Nigeria have any oil? Are there other African nation states producing? Does Libya have that sweet crude oil still? Libya has nothing to do with any of this. So it's like, why are you discounting all of these things? I mean, Dangote in Nigeria just created the largest refinery in sub-Saharan Africa. Like, why is this completely ignored and unmentioned? Why? I need to know. Shout out to MDOT supporting the work. Appreciate you. May also acknowledge CMD, right? Saint. Stories move more people than any reality ever will, correct? The control of narratives will forever control a population of people. And this guy is really creating a narrative, and people who think that he is genius and they think they are geniuses, they like to believe this stuff, but because they lack knowledge, they cannot ask the right questions. Gentleman writes, Mr. Burton, for a young person seeking to truly understand politics, okay, actually, I read that one already. Thank you very much. Carrying on.
Okay? So in other words, the United States starts a stupid war in the GCC in the Middle East. It can't possibly win, but it still benefits because now the world is much more dependent on North America. Okay? Why is Venezuela important? Because America just took over Venezuela in January. Okay? And look, Canada has a lot of oil, and Trump is...
Now, one thing I want you guys to notice that he did not mention, you see, before he was saying Trump isn't good at planning. So Trump threatened NATO when he claimed that he would acquire Greenland. And then Trump invades or attacks Iran and then turns around and asks for help from NATO. So that was poor planning on Trump's part. What if Trump was a good planner and he took over Venezuela, which has a huge oil reserve, and then he proceeds to block the Strait of Hormuz as a side effect of attacking Iran while having already secured a huge oil supply? That would be good planning, right? Is he going to acknowledge that, is the question.
Threatening to take over Canada. Okay? So now let's look at who needs the oil. Well, this map tells you that if you're in the red, you consume more oil than you export. And who are these countries? Well, they're Europe, okay? And they are East Asia, as well as Australia. Okay? So, yes, I understand Donald Trump's an idiot. Yes, I understand that he's going to lose this war in the Middle East. Yes, I understand he's going to...
Again, the idiot piece, not necessary. Losing the war, he still has yet to define that.
destroy the global economy, but...
Destroy the global economy. Well, what the real issue would be is removing the United States dollar as a global reserve currency. That's really what you should be stating, but carry on.
For some strange reason, he benefits. And the United States benefits. Because now,
I want you guys to notice that this whole time, we're talking about a war in Iran, which was undoubtedly, we can all agree, prompted by Israel. Yet there's been no mention of Israel.
Europe and China, Japan, Australia, they are much more dependent on North America for resources, for food, for energy. Okay?
And there we would have to say, is that true? What about oil from Libya? What about oil from Nigeria? We would have to say, is that true? What about oil from Guyana?
All right, food. Okay, so nitrogen is important for fertilizers. Okay, you need nitrogen for fertilizers. And as you can...
This is a very important argument which has been made by other scholars in great depth. And I'm glad he's bringing this up because it's absolutely critical and it doesn't get discussed enough.
And what this map tells you is that if you are in the blue or the light blue, it means you produce more nitrogen than you need, so you export it. If you are not in the blue, then you're kind of screwed, okay? So basically, this area especially, this area, okay? Europe, as some parts of Europe, okay? So now they need more nitrogen. And again, before they were getting a lot of nitrogen, ammonia, from the Middle East. And now, where are they forced to get the nitrogen? From here and from here. Okay?
Now, this is, again, really neat because as of now, Canada has stepped away from the United States in a very strong way. They've made many public declarations. They stepped toward China in terms of trade collaboration on in terms of their auto industry. I saw one character in the live chat who gives himself more credit than he should, and always is the folks who aren't willing to super chat. He was like, they just started with a small amount of cars. It's only this percentage. Well, that's how you start in business. You don't start and say, hey, we're going to do $1 million deal off the rip. No, you start, hey, we're going to do a significant deal, 100K. Cool, that worked, great. Now let's move up to $500,000. That worked, great. Let's scale up to $1 million. And what they're going to see is as soon as those Chinese EVs hit the market in Canada, they're going to drive extraordinary demand. And it's only going to go up. There's no reason that it would not. So it is the harbinger of doom. And if you don't have the experience or ability to anticipate that, that's why I'm the one lecturing and you're in the live chat. So, chill out there. You're not able to predict things logically.
So again, yes, I know Donald Trump's losing this war in the Middle East, but in the long term, America stands to benefit. And
again, that's something that I'd ask him to elaborate on. When you say America stands to benefit, who? American corporations, like American multinational corporations, the American plutocrats. How does the everyday person benefit? So don't use the term America. Use the term the American military industrial complex. Use the term the American plutocracy, the American government, the Epstein class. It's important to clarify that. And so often, that's why the population has been tricked, because we hear America and we think it includes us. And that's not the case. You even hear black folks say, oh, Donald Trump's only helping white folks. No, he's not. He's not helping everyday average white folks. They're getting done dirty. They may be supporting him in greater numbers, but they're not benefiting. The rising tide is not, lifting their boat.
Right. Last thing I want to look at is water. Okay, water is important because water tells us which areas are the most stable. Basically, if you have a lot of water, you're less prone to conflict. But
I think he could probably unpack that a little bit more. And water has many, it's a little deeper than when you talk about water, you also want to talk about ports. When you talk about ports, you can talk about shallow ports or deep ports. I gave two lectures, one on Hong Kong, one on Macau. And Hong Kong is a better port than Macau. Macau's a shallow port. Hong Kong is a deeper port. That's why Macau used to be used for trade at some level. And then Hong Kong became a player. Macau was controlled by the Portuguese, Hong Kong controlled by the British. And as soon as Hong Kong got cracking, Macau survived by pivoting over to gambling and tourism. And so the quality of your port in some places may have coastline and water, but they don't have a proper port that's suitable for trade, and it can take large vessels. So there is sophistication in all of these things, and often his analysis lacks sophistication. He just said something that on the face of it should not make sense to you. He said, well, if you have water, you're going to have peace. You're like, what? How? What are you talking about? So he's speaking and assuming that you're just going to go with him without thinking, because he's not actually giving any reasoned explanation as to why these things may be the case.
Don't have that much water, then you're prone to conflict, okay? So we look at, so if you're in a dark blue, you're good, okay? Nothing to worry about. If you are in the light blue, you are in a lot of trouble, okay? So we look at this area, North America, pretty stable because lots and lots of fresh water, okay? If you look at Russia, pretty stable, lots and lots of fresh water.
Okay, so that's a different thing. So now he's saying fresh water. Before he was just saying water. Now he's saying fresh water, which are two different things, right? Water can be used for your arable land. Fresh water is used for human consumption and different things. And so imprecision of language, I'd have to give him a mark down for that one. But let's carry on.
But if you're Africa, you're in a lot of trouble. If you're Europe, you're in a lot of trouble. If you are Middle East, you're in a lot of trouble. If you are Southeast Asia, you are not much trouble, but you are in some trouble, okay? So we already see how this map tells us where in the future, basically Russia and the United States, North America.
I think this is the argument that he has articulated so far with regards to water, fresh water, has been one of his worst and weakest arguments. Like very, very poor. Like this is a terrible argument. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of young people and those who are not terribly well informed don't understand how bad this argument is. Europe's made it just fine. Throughout the Middle East, Israel, Saudi, to a much lesser degree, Iran, they have desalination plants, which is to say that they can take salt water, take ocean water, and make it drinkable and useful for various other purposes. In the case of the Middle East now, you have war, which is destroying some of this infrastructure. So yes, water will become a problem. But water is not the actual problem there. War is the problem. So his argument is pretty bad with regards to Europe, when has water been an issue in the last 100 years in Europe? Like, I'll wait. Like in the last 100 years, when has water been an issue in Europe? It has not. So the question is, well, why all of a sudden? And this is also assuming that moving into the future, there's no level of innovation, which will make it even less of a problem. And I can only assume that just like we have desalination plants throughout the Middle East, that Europe, being reasonably technical, will only find better ways to deal with a lack of fresh water. So I think that this is a completely ludicrous argument, but he's using it as a necessary component to create the image of a bipolar world with Russia as one empire and the United States as another empire, and point them at odds with each other. And you'll notice that on a consistent basis, China is not coming up. It's like he forgot to talk about China. But let's see. We are 20 minutes in, and it seems as like he's just forgotten all about China. He's mentioned Russia a ton. He's mentioned the United States a ton, talked all about the United States, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. But China is largely absent. And if you're a sensible person, you'd have to say, well, you are Chinese, you are in China. China is a superpower. Seems like you've not made meaningful mention.
Are the most stable parts of the world with the most resources. And therefore, they are the most resilient, the most stable, okay? But if you go to Africa, Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia, these are points of conflict in the world. So we can expect these places to become much more unstable over time. So in other words,
see, he didn't clarify that. He said these are points of conflict. Why? Over water? Did he give us any examples of Europeans fighting over water? Did he give us any examples of Southeast Asians fighting or being destabilized over fresh water? He gave us 0 examples. So that's not an argument. Shout out to Life, supporting the work. I appreciate you. And these kind of things I find to be very annoying, particularly when you see people in the comments swearing up and down Brody is a genius. He's smart. No doubt he's smart. But genius, please stop it. His political analyses are great because he has great visuals and he simplifies things so that they're understandable by high school kids. Shout out to Emika, supporting the work via PayPal, writes, how many books have you read in your life? I have no idea. He writes, how often do you read? Not half as much as I used to read. And increasingly, reading will not be a thing, meaning, I might pick up a volume. I remember when I was 16, I was reading Origin of the Species and Descent of Man, like really getting into like serious text. And maybe that's why I don't read so much, because I've already devoured so many pieces. And now I'm more so reading scholarly journals, works that are shorter. They're mostly referencing research. But frankly, it will be hard to understand what is next. But one thing I'm certain of is that what is next is not the same thing that created a foundation for me, which was reading serious texts when I was young. I don't think that smart kids of the future are going to be reading Dostoevsky. I don't think they're going to be reading War and Peace. I don't think they're going to be reading fill in the blank. I don't think they're going to be reading Das Kapital. I don't think they're going to be reading Theory of the Leisure Class. The world is changing. Reading will always be important, but to consider yourself knowledgeable on the things that matter in the moment and the next moment, print is too slow. Books are too slow. So the value of books has declined rapidly. Not the value of knowledge or the value of learning or the value of reading, but the value of books has declined rapidly. Shout out to Buzek, supporting the work rights, Peace of the Saints. I think I might be the first person to have said that. It doesn't sound good, but it's just the truth.
All the United States and Russia have to do is maintain stability and then export resources to these places. And guess what?
He still has not explained why Europe is destabilized and fighting over fresh water. He hasn't explained why Southeast Asia is destabilized and fighting over fresh water. And he even hasn't even explained why the Africans would be fighting each other over fresh water. Is that civil strife or is that interstate conflict over fresh water? Because I've not heard of this at all. I've not heard of the Africans fighting each other over water. I've certainly heard of Africans being used as tools for wars between, with the Arabs fighting the Christians in Sudan, or the Chinese and the Americans using proxies to take over, opportunities with coltan, uranium, and things of the like, mineral wealth. Russians positioning themselves as helpers and peacekeepers and security forces to stabilize, regimes in the Sahel. But never did it have anything to do with water. It was always like gold, diamonds, things that support the modern economy, EV batteries, these kind of things. So what the hell is this guy talking about?
And then they make a lot of money for themselves. Okay? So again, I understand Donald Trump's an idiot. I understand this war in the Middle East is stupid, but from a long-term game theory perspective, the United States wins from this disaster from a long-term perspective, okay?
Now, again, when you say long-term, how long? 1 year? 2 years? 10 years? 3 decades? A century? How long? How long is long? Because if you're talking about, like in my life, I would consider long to be 3 months. If you're talking about in the life of, and that's just an individual human's perspective on what long means. But if you're talking about the perspective of a government or an administration, well, long would be 4 years, because that's a whole term as a president. If you're talking about the life of a nation, nations should be thinking in terms of decades. If you're talking about, a people group, a civilization or a heritage, they can be thinking in terms of centuries. So how long? And that's important, but he hasn't defined it at all. And it's in these amorphous, undefined terms that we find that there is an extraordinary void of meaning.
Now, you look at this map, you think, well, China's pretty good too, right? Like China has a lot of fresh water. The problem with China, though, is this. China sits on a lot of fresh water that Southeast Asia and India depends on, okay? So a lot of water is in the Tibetan Plateau. It flows downstream into India and in Southeast Asia. If there were a drought, using game theory.
Okay, so, now let me ask you this. He says, if there were a drought, now what he's about to say could be completely reasonable, but it exists on the premise of if there were a drought. So a logician would say, how often do droughts occur? How often do they occur? Number one. And then number two, you'd have to ask, well, in the last 100 years, how many droughts have occurred? None. 1, 2, 3. And when they have occurred, what was the result? Did these countries go to war? Did they fight each other? Let's see if he addresses any of that.
We can suspect that China might want to keep the water for itself, right? In which case, Southeast Asia and India would be very angry, okay? So this is a potential flashpoint.
But don't we usually use history to ground our arguments, to say, hey, this has happened before, so we can suspect that it might happen again? But notice there's no reference to history, also known as evidence or examples,
that we have to watch out for.
So the thing that I find challenging is, like, where's the brilliance? Where's the brilliance? Where's the knowledge?
Okay, so it seems like China is stable, but the surrounding areas are not so stable. And so China will be dragged into a conflict.
Wait, what surrounding areas are not stable and why? What are you talking about? What surrounding areas are not stable and why? For the last 10 minutes, he's just been saying things that have made no sense, not just to me, but to anybody. He's not validated anything he said. There's no validation. He's just making statements that are baseless.
Okay.
I'm just like, damn, is there anyone in the audience? Like, is anybody going to ask, like, sir, excuse me, Mr. Jiang, like, what are you talking about?
All right. So let's summarize what we've learned so far. So these are the countries with the most oil reserves, okay? Venezuela. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Canada, Iraq, UAE, Kuwait, United States, Russia. Okay. All right. Now what's interesting about this is this. This war in the Middle East is going to knock out the oil production of Saudi Arabia, of Iran, of Iraq, of UAE, of Kuwait, which leaves what? Which leaves, Venezuela, Canada, and the United States, okay? North America, and Russia. Okay? Now, then let's look at who has to buy oil. All right? Let's look at who buys oil. Well, to buy oil. All right? Let's look at who buys oil. Well,
you know what's really funny about this list here is that, again, I told you he's creating a really neat world. And you'll notice that I mentioned Libya, I mentioned Nigeria, and it was like right when he gets to those countries, he did not want to include them in his explanation.
Has to buy oil. All right, let's look at who buys oil. Well, the United States consumes a lot of oil, but again, it has its own supply of oil. China needs to import a lot of its oil needs, okay? So China imports about 75% of its oil needs. India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Japan, South Korea, okay? Germany, all right? So China, India, Japan, South Korea imports a lot of oil. And where does it get its oil from? The Middle East, right? So if it can't get its oil from the Middle East, then these four countries, China, India, Japan, and South Korea, will need it to get the oil either from the United States or Russia. Okay? And why does this matter? Well, let's look at this. Let's look at who owns the most U.S. treasuries. Basically, if you own a lot of U.S. treasuries, it means that you are financing American debt. America right now is $39 trillion in debt. That's a lot of money, but as long as people continue to buy U.S. debt, as long as people want to buy U.S. treasuries, it's not a problem, okay? It's a Ponzi scheme.
That's true. It is a Ponzi scheme. It's 100% a Ponzi scheme. The concept of debt is one of the most evil things in the modern world. The way it operates in the credit system, it is truly sick.
Okay. So let's look at this. Who are the biggest holders of U.S. debt? Japan, China, right? Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, India. Okay, so this is all Asia. And we already said that Asia needs a lot of oil from the Middle East, right? Now let's look at others. United Kingdom is second, okay? Cayman Islands is basically just Europe as well. It's a money laundering operation, okay? Belgium, Luxembourg, Canada, France, Ireland, Switzerland. These countries are Europe. And again, where do we say most oil from the GCC go? It goes to either Asia or Europe. And now because of the stupid war in the Middle East, Asia and Europe are now forced to buy oil from either Russia or the United States. And this is important, okay? This is important because previously there's a fear that these countries would stop buying U.S. treasuries because America is too heavily in debt. The American economy is too much of a Ponzi scheme. So there's this great fear that Europe and Asia would move away from the US dollar and more towards Swiss francs or gold, okay? Now...
So Swiss francs, no, I don't think so. Gold, have we seen that? No, we've not really seen that.
Because Europe and Asia need fertilizer. They need energy from the United States and North America.
Wait, what are the numbers on the U.S. exporting fertilizer? That's interesting.
The United States no longer has to worry about its debt, okay? All right, the $39 trillion debt, not a problem, because the entire world is dependent on North America for resources. The policy can keep on going.
Now, this is really interesting because we often hear that Africa has a lot of resources, right? And curiously, with Africa being a resource-rich place, all of a sudden in his explanation, Africa is not factoring in as a resource-rich place. And his explanation of why Africa will be so destabilized is because they're fighting for fresh water, but gives no evidence of this having happened. He said Europe will be fighting for fresh water with each other. He's given no precedence for this. Same thing with Asia. So he has very flimsy explanations, makes no reference to history. Now, I was curious that he calls his channel Predictive History, which is fine, but he doesn't give historical examples. Like, you'll notice that consistently, it's like he has no knowledge of history and is only able to speculate based on what exists today. And he's often looking at worst case scenarios, which does not suggest that he's being balanced or realistic.
So again, Donald Trump is an idiot, but he's so stupid, he's become a genius. Okay?
That does happen on the planet Earth. Shout out to Emmanuel supporting the work via Venmo. Writes, tuition, peace to the saints. I appreciate you, man. So acknowledge. Brad, he writes, he often brushes over Africa. Oh, entirely and completely and consistently. Shout out to Carter. He writes, I always found that Mr. Jiang's method of teaching was quite inarticulate, oversimplified, and speculatory. Emphasis on speculatory. I mean, I think you're correct on all three, especially the oversimplified and speculatory. He never seemed to be a great mind in the geopolitical and theological spheres. Maybe it's because I'm used to listening to the best in the business. Peace to the saints. I'm trying to tell you, man. When I run it down to you, I always run it down with historical examples because history is a teacher. And oppositely, he's run it down with no historical examples and even a lack of data on the present situation. And what's really peculiar is when he's using scientific determinism, he does not allow for the fact that human societies advance. So he suggested that in the future, there's going to be enormous issues with fresh water, not acknowledging that technology will prevent some of those problems from happening. It's just very bizarre. Like, we already have a technological solution to lack of fresh water. It already exists, and it'll probably only get better. Shout out to Clay. He writes, support for taking the time out of your busy schedule to educate us. I appreciate you. Shout out to the real ones. You're welcome, and I thank you. Mr. Chambliss writes, this is the same thing that Jeffrey E. did in his interview because Mr. Jiang said, quote, Africa has no fresh water, end quote, without talking about the Great Lakes. Yeah, isn't that something? I also acknowledge Emika. Looks like PayPal's holding your payment. It happens. Shout out to Zachary writes, what do you think Jiang's actual goal is here? Well, we would not be wise to look at an individual video and try to assess his goal. We'd have to look at all of the videos collectively and ask ourselves, what is often the topic? You know, we're looking for the thread that's always there. You know, America has bad leadership. America is a declining empire. America is making bad military decisions. America is a threat to global peace. So that's always there. China seems to be the elephant in the room that often doesn't get discussed or acknowledged. And sometimes invisibility is power. So I think there is no doubt that he's a propagandist on behalf of China and is making a buttload of money while doing it. And, you know, I can't hate him for that because he is, in fact, Chinese. And I've always said that the Chinese have a very strong allegiance, largely due to them mostly being Han Chinese, and also even those in the Chinese diaspora going to Chinese school, learning language, Mandarin, sometimes Cantonese, and certainly Chinese history. They're a proud people, a strong culture. And there's a Chinese community, a little Chinatown, mostly everywhere in the world. So they're always going to be nationalistic. That's not a crime. And they're going to identify with their tribe, which is quite a large one and a very powerful one. And so right now we see that he is pretty much a race soldier. So I think that's kind of his thing. And this doesn't mean that he's lying. Those of you who have studied propaganda, you know that the best of propaganda is not lies. It's when you mostly have the truth with some propaganda and some persuasion peppered in. And that's what you're seeing with this guy, is that you have some meaningful insights, but a lot of logical leaps where he's not quite justifying what he's saying. And that's where the propaganda comes into play. And also, sometimes it's about the argument you make, but then it's also about the argument that you didn't make, right? You made an argument as to why Europe will fall apart, but you didn't make an argument about why China might, have social unrest. You made an argument as to why America is an ailing empire, but didn't make an argument as to why Russia is not an ailing empire. It's like you didn't draw a parallel between Russia, Ukraine, and America, Iran. So there's no doubt that he's pushing a perspective, and I can't hate him for it. It makes sense. He's a Chinese man pushing a Chinese a narrative favorable to China, which is a lot better than, say, a Officer Officer Talmud Tatum being a black man pushing a narrative that's favorable to a white country that's far away. So it makes sense, his position, and it's fairly obvious.
All right. Now you're like, wait, but Donald Trump's an idiot. Where would he get this idea from? How would he know how to do this? And the answer is because Putin has already proven that this strategy works in Ukraine. Okay, so let me show you how. Okay, so this is the war in Ukraine. And as you can see, the dark red are areas in which Russia is contesting territory. The light red,
That's curious. I see Crimea is included, and I thought Russia took Crimea a long time ago. So I'm curious as to why Crimea is even included as part of the highlighted color as opposed to Russia. And someone feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Shelter7 comes in via PayPal. He writes, has Jiang presented any information that you were able to make your own inferences from? If you'd be kind enough to paraphrase, I just want to make sure that I fully understand you.
The pink are areas in which Russia wants to gain territory. As you can see, Russia still has a long way to go. And we're already 4 or 5 years into this war, which means that this war can go on for another 10, 20 years. It's a very slow grind. And it's good for Russia. Yes, I know that Russia is losing a lot of soldiers, and I know that the Russian economy is suffering, but this long war of attrition is good for Russia.
Why is that? Why?
Well, because first of all, what it does is it allows Russia to industrialize its economy. Okay? It allows its...
Okay, now let's pay attention to this. He's saying it's good for Russia because it allows Russia to industrialize its economy. Now, this is a peculiar way to state that. Maybe reindustrialize or maybe shift to manufacturing. I think industrialize, it's a little too... There should be more specific language, but I'm rolling with you. Now let's hear what you're talking about.
It allows Russia to center its economy around war production, okay? So the red, as you can see, is total industry, okay? And as you can see, it's been going up since the war started, all right? Overall industry has been going up as well. Unfortunately, industries that are not dominated by the military, that have no war purpose, it's actually going down. Okay? So it seems as though the entire Russian economy is being restructured for total war, for a long war. And that is the purpose, that is the goal.
Now, mind you, so far, he's not moved forward any meaningful insight or logic. I just want to repeat what he said in simple terms so that you're tracking. He suggested that Russia has reorganized its economy to support its war effort. Now, mind you, this is not unique. Anytime a country is in a war, you have to produce more munitions, more spare parts, more weapons, more missiles, more aircraft. So he's not said anything meaningful so far. In fact, it's quite obvious any country that is in a serious war will have to use more resources for the weapons of war. You're going to make less cars for consumers. You're going to make more tanks for the battle. Got it. Okay, we're still listening.
Okay, so again, the pink are military industries. The blue are civilian industries. And as you can see, the pink completely dominate the blue. And the trend is increasing, meaning it is possible in 4 or 5 years' time, Russia is primarily a war economy, industrializing to produce war weapons, okay, munitions. Specifically.
Now, again, there's still no insight here. This is the weird thing, because average people think that once you pop up a chart and you explain the chart, that you've moved the logic forward. The chart doesn't give the logic. The chart describes what is occurring. It's a representation of data. It is not itself an argument. So what he said is Russia's at war. Their economy is becoming a war economy. Duh, okay? Come on, come with it.
Drones, okay? These are drones. All right. So, before, at the beginning of the war, Russia was dependent on Iran for drones, okay?
Shout out to Frank supporting the work. So he's about to say that Russia continues to buy drones from Iran, and then they started producing their own drones. Yeah, duh. Yeah, isn't that what happens? If you figure out that you need something, you're going to start to make it for yourself if you're smart. And generally, and the Chinese do this a lot, and he's Chinese, so I trust he knows this, they copy things and then improve it. Sometimes they copy it and don't improve it, but the Chinese, they often copy it and will improve it. So that's what the Russians did with drone tech. Okay, so what are you saying? Still haven't made no argument and no meaningful insight. This is obvious. You don't even need a chart to explain this. I mean, this is common sense. It is very predictable.
But then what happened over time is that Russia started to have its own domestic production, okay? So imports from Iran have stayed constant, and then domestic production has gone way up, which tells us.
Yeah, of course. So where's the insight? If I didn't say shout to Frank using the Stripe link, I appreciate you. Yeah, so where's the insight? Of course, when you're at war, you want production to be domestic, because if the enemy cuts off your supply lines, you can't resupply. You will be you'll be at a lack of weapons. You won't have spare parts. You won't be able to operate your military machine. So of course, Russia's producing their own drones. Duh. So what are you saying, my dear boy? Like, for the last 5 minutes, I've been listening. You've been describing data, but you have not provided an argument. You started off with a statement that was unfounded. You've not substantiated it at all. And you've provided data that's tangentially related, and you've not moved your argument forward. So the idea that people think there's something of great meaning with this guy is bizarre. It's very bizarre. And then, of course, you have the Nimrods in the chat. Relax, he's talking to high schoolers. Shut up. Shut up. Don't make excuses for the fact that he's showing beautiful visuals, but he's making no meaningful arguments. You're getting finessed. You're getting intellectually finessed. Anyways, The gentleman writes, peace and saints, can you speak about the danger of dealing with curvy women while being on your purpose? To be honest, it is too much for me to handle. Saint, bro, I'm trying to tell you, man. You really got to stay focused on your purpose. And it's not that hard once you realize that most of them, curvy, thick, skinny, what have you, offer minimal value, but maximum cost. And once you really are seeking to achieve something, I get angry when people take me away from my goals. So when you're actually focused on your goal, you'll notice that so much of what they bring to you are distractions, anger, emotional instability, disturbance, risk, legal and otherwise. And you'll instantly react the correct way. Boss University is a great way of calibrating your mind to think like a boss, because the more of these things you can put on autopilot, you can focus. Because when you're using your conscious mind, you want to use your conscious mind on your wealth goal. You don't want to use your conscious mind because it takes energy. You don't want to use your conscious mind on trying to figure out, should I be dealing with this chick? Is she trying to finesse me? How do I stop her from distracting me? You don't want to use your conscious mind for that. You want to use your subconscious mind for that. And those should be easy things to push away. And Boston University conditions you for that. May I also acknowledge, Chawal writes, I assume he meant Africa would be destabilized because of current conflicts persisting over time rather than fighting over fresh water. Well, here's the thing. You're saying, I assume. If he's giving a lecture, we shouldn't have to assume anything. That's why he's giving the lecture, to teach. So we shouldn't have to assume a thing. And not only should you not assume it, because if someone's making an argument, they have to give evidence. So if his initial thesis is unclear, when he provides the evidence, the thesis should be clarified. So if the thesis was not clarified, his hypothesis has to be rejected because it has not been substantiated. It's very simple.
Is that the Russian economy is industrializing for the production of drones. And Russia is preparing to fight a long, long war. Now, not only can Russia produce its own drones for the war, but it can also export its drones to Iran to fight against the Americans. Okay? And so you're like, wait a minute here. So Russia is switching its entire economy to war production, which means that Russia will always fight wars. Is that what Russia's planning? And the answer is yes, it is. Okay? And so let me explain.
Now that was crazy, bruh. That was really crazy. That was crazy. I mean, if I were the Russians, I'd be pretty mad about that claim right there. I'd be really mad about that claim because Lil Buddy said Russia is basically planning to be an eternal warmonger. It's like, word. Word. Like that. And it's like, what evidence are you basing that on, Jiang? The fact that they're orienting their economy on war because they're actually in a war. Come on, dude. I don't know if that's a strong argument. I mean, yeah, I'm not convinced that that's a very strong argument. It's possible. I agree. And it seems like he's dealing in what is possible, but mostly worst case scenarios, which is weird, instead of what's probable or what's historically grounded.
What happened over time is that Russia started to have its own domestic production, okay? So imports from Iran have stayed constant, and then domestic production has gone way up, which tells us that the Russian economy is industrializing for the production of drones. And Russia is preparing to...
It's such strange language he's using because Stalin was the lead guy in Russia that was industrializing the country, taking them from being an agrarian society. All of these countries Europe, the United States, Russia, these are all industrialized economies. So it's a bit strange that he's saying industrializing. I don't know if he means to express that they're expanding their manufacturing base or they're focusing on heavy industry, but the language he's using is not the correct language.
Fight a long, long war. Now, not only can Russia produce its own drones for the war, but it can also export its drones to Iran to fight against the Americans. Okay? And so you're like, wait a minute here. So Russia is switching its entire economy to war production, which means that Russia will always fight wars. I mean, is that what Russia's planning? And the answer,
I mean, this is the most bizarre statement. He said Russia is orienting their economy on the manufacture of drones so that they can thrive in their current war. And then he said, which means that they will always fight wars. What? If you're in a war, how could you not orient your economy on manufacturing weapons? How could you not? It wouldn't make any sense. And he's saying because they're making sure that they're prepared for the current war, that means they're indefinitely at war. It's not even sensible. It's not even minimally sensible. And at this point, if I wasn't lecturing on this, reacting, I would have closed my laptop and went to sleep.
yes, it is, okay? And so let me explain why Russia is planning this. This is something called the Third Rome Plan, okay? And this comes from the 1996 book.
So now this is the first time, actually this is the third time that he's made a reference, but he could have made a lot more references. And I think he's making this reference now to add legitimacy to his argument, which is basically an anti-Russia argument. And I don't know if the goal is maybe to shift Western thinking away from China being the enemy to Russia being the enemy. Maybe that's his propaganda goal at this time. I also think it's quite bizarre that it's called the Third Rome as a concept, as opposed to the reestablishment of the Soviet Union or, the Tsarist Empire. I think this is an interesting formulation, but I hope he mentions when this book was published, because that'll probably give us some indication of why certain language is used.
Foundations of Geopolitics, okay, by Alexander Dugin, who I think is one of the smartest geopolitical thinkers alive today, okay? And his argument is this. His argument is this unipolar moment of American dominance, it's going to fade away because it's too much focus on.
Now, again, he's saying American dominance, but in the current era, America's not dominating. You look at China's trade surplus, you look at their trade partners, you look at the Belt and Road Initiative. America's not dominant anymore. So it's kind of weird how he's not talking about the elephant in the room. And it's consistent, isn't it?
On secularism, individualism, liberalism. And these ideas break apart community. These ideas are anti-human. So eventually, Western society, Western civilization will collapse because its values are abhorrent. And when it collapses, this is opportunity for Moscow to become the third Rome, okay? We'll talk more about this in the future.
Now, this is so weird, and this is how you know he's a Chinese propagandist at this point, because he says the West is going to collapse due to inferior value set. Okay, interesting. But in place of the West is not China, because China's not a threat. China's not competing. China's not trying to establish dominance, even though they are. China's not going to step into the vacuum. Russia's going to step into the vacuum. And this goes straight along with the narrative of the Western war hawks that Russia is a problem, when in fact, the true problem is China. Not to say Russia is not a competitor, but China is the true problem.
Future. But what's brilliant about Dugin is he recognizes that when the world collapses, all Russia has to do is stay stable and resilient. As long as it stays together, unified, cohesive, it'll be fine, okay? Because as this global order collapses, as the global economy collapses, every other society will face eternal collapse, such as the United States, okay? So he predicts civil war in the United States as left and right go to war against each other, okay? He predicts collapse of China. He predicts collapse of the Middle East. He predicts collapse of Europe, okay? So all these places are collapsing. Basically, if you are the main pillar of the global economy, you are much more susceptible to collapse than if you are not, okay? So what Dugan says is this, okay, all right.
Did anyone understand? Let me just rewind that.
Of the Middle East. He predicts collapse of Europe, okay? So all these...
Okay, he predicts the collapse of Europe, but why? I mean, Europe went through a World War I, they went through a World War II, and they're still kind of there. Like, what do you mean by collapse? What does that mean? By what year will they collapse? What does collapse look like? Europe has survived 2 world wars. They seem to be fine, in good shape right now. Great consumer protections, high per capita income. What are you talking about?
Places are collapsing. Basically, if you are the main pillar of the global economy, you are much more susceptible to collapse than if you are not, okay? So what Dugan says is this, okay, all right. So the strategy is, first of all, Russia needs to stay coherent. It needs to defend its territory. It needs...
You know what the most bizarre thing is through this whole bit? He's not mentioned China one time. One time. Very strange. Shout out to Miles. He writes, "Peace to the Saints. Thank you, Mr. Burton, for this very detailed analysis. I can't stand it when authority figures oversimplify things, because when you go to execute the said thing, you quickly realize it's not that simple, and it's extremely frustrating." Yeah, I agree. Lies set you up for failure, in other words. Agree. Shout out to Mr. Chambliss. He writes, "I came in a strong way via Venmo." He writes, "That's just like when Jeffrey said in his interview with Steve Bannon, quote, most political leaders come out of a background of being popular. Some African countries, they might have been a disc jockey," end quote. That's crazy. That is wild. But you certainly do need the intellectual talent to to close the gap. And certainly there are some countries that are coming from a great deficit.
To unify its people through nationalism, through religion, okay, through faith. And then what Russia needs to do is figure out allies that would support the Russian outlook. And these allies could include Japan, okay? Vietnam, India, Iran, okay? And then by combining their forces, they become a trading bloc onto themselves. This is an age of nuclear weapons. You don't want to go to war against each other. But this is also an age of collapse. So as long as you're able to stay coherent, as long as you're able to defend your border.
What about China though, buddy? Like, and does anyone think it's bizarre that he talked about Russia being an ally of Vietnam and all these other countries that are so far away, quite close to China? So it's not, China's not going to become allies with them and build strong bonds and move forward into a future in which China's the hegemon. Russia, which, you know, kind of has to like hop over China to get to Vietnam, they're going to link up with Vietnam and these other countries in Southeast Asia and become the hegemon. It's like, word.
Then you'll come out ahead, okay? So that's the idea of moving towards war, because war has a power to unify the imagination and the beliefs of the people in your nation, right? So you're using war in order to increase the nationalism, the religion of your society, which will allow you to weather the storm.
Yeah, he presents some interesting data and some of his arguments are sensible, but what I like about him is that he talks about interesting topics that are current. So he's able to figure out what's trending and speak on it, but there's not a lot to learn. There's just not a lot to learn. If you like facts, there's some facts there, but in terms of argumentation, logic, and prediction, at least in this lecture, maybe I won't judge the gentleman based on, you know, this one lecture, but in this lecture, it was a little on E in terms of real understanding. Life writes, he knows a whole lot about everyone else. Not much of a gentleman, and I doubt has ever been slapped. You talking about Jiang? You talking about Jiang right now? But yeah, he seems to skip over China. It's kind of bizarre. Ladies and saints, it's been a pleasure at this time to fellowship with you all. Until next time, peace to the saints.